Hello everyone, and welcome to Lesson 13.3. I've entitled this video, War with Mexico. This video is going to cover pages 360 to 364. The New Mexico Territory. In the early 1800s, the land called New Mexico was a vast region between the Texas and California territories. It included all the land that is now the states of New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. Native Americans had lived in the area for thousands of years. Spanish conquistadors, or soldiers, arrived in the late 1500s. They made the region part of Spain's American colonies. In 1610, the Spanish founded the settlement of Santa Fe. Spanish missionaries soon followed the conquistadors into the area. Mexico, including New Mexico, won its independence from Spain in 1821. Before that time, the Spanish had tried to keep Americans away from Santa Fe. They feared that Americans would want to take over the area. The new Mexican government, however, welcomed American traders. Mexico hoped trade would boost the economy. William Becknell, the first American trader to reach Santa Fe, arrived in 1821. Becknell's route came to be known as the Santa Fe Trail. It was a big improvement over the trails that existed in the dry and rugged area at that time. As Becknell wrote, quote, "I avoided the so much dreaded sandhills where adventurers had frequently been forced to drink the blood of their mules to allay their thirst." The Santa Fe Trail started near Independence, Missouri, and you can see that on the map here, right there, which was then on the western edge of the United States. It crossed the prairies to the Arkansas River. It followed the river west toward the Rocky Mountains before turning south. The trail was mostly flat, and Becknell used wagons to transport his goods. Other Americans soon followed Becknell. The Santa Fe Trail became a busy trade route. As trade with New Mexico increased, Americans began settling in the area. Some began to believe that acquiring New Mexico was part of American manifest destiny. Question number 1. What was the area known as the New Mexico Territory in the early 1800s? It would be the areas that we now call New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. Question 2. Why did Mexico want Americans to trade with Santa Fe? Well, they were hoping that that would boost the economy of the area. So many times I ask the question why, and many times the answer is money. Question 3. What made the Santa Fe Trail important and valuable at that time? Well, what it did was it was a much better trail than previous trails, and it crossed the rivers in good places, and the trail was mostly flat, so you could use wagons and you didn't have a hard time. So this was a good trail. California's Spanish culture. Spanish explorers and missionaries from Mexico settled California in the 1700s. Captain Gaspar de Portola and Father Junipero Serra began a chain of missions that eventually extended from San Diego to Sonoma. The missions aimed to convert Native Americans to Christianity and the Spanish way of life. Native Americans learned new farming methods, and they worked at weaving and other crafts. American mountain man Jedediah Smith described the missions as, quote, large farming and cattle ranching establishments. Question 4. How was California history impacted by the Spanish during the 1700s? Well, they set up a chain of missions that did eventually try to convert Native Americans to Christianity and how the Spanish lived their lives, including different ways to farm and do other things such as that. After Mexico won independence from Spain in 1821, California became a Mexican state. Mexicans bought mission lands and set up huge ranches, or ranchos. Native Americans worked the land in return for food and shelter. Rancheros, ranch owners, treated Native Americans very poorly. In the 1840s, more Americans reached California. John C. Fremont, an Army officer, wrote of the region's mild climate and vast natural resources. Americans began to talk about adding California to the Union. They argued that the nation would then be safely bordered by the Pacific Ocean rather than by a foreign country. Shippers also hoped to build seaports on the Pacific coast for trade with East Asia. Question number 5. What were ranchos and rancheros during that time period? Well, ranchos were the ranches that were set up by the Mexicans in California, and rancheros were the ranch owners. Question number 6. How were the Native Americans treated by the rancheros? Very poorly. Question 7. What were some reasons why Americans began to talk about adding California to the United States? Well, talk of its excellent climate, its natural resources, and there were a lot of those, and also the fact that it would give us access to the Pacific Ocean. Instead of having another country have that, we would have access to the Pacific Ocean, and shippers could have seaports on that Pacific coast for trade. Conflict begins. President James K. Polk was determined to get the California and New Mexico territories from Mexico. After Mexico refused to sell the lands, Polk planned to gain them through war. To justify a war, Polk hoped to get Mexico to strike first. Relations between the two countries were not friendly. The two nations disagreed about where the Texas-Mexico border was. The United States said that the Rio Grande formed the border. Mexico claimed that the border lay along the Nueces River, 150 miles farther north. Polk sent a representative, John Slidell, to Mexico to propose a deal. Slidell could offer $30 million for California and New Mexico, as long as Mexico accepted the Rio Grande as the Texas border. The United States would also pay what Mexico owed to American citizens. Mexican leaders refused to discuss the offer. They announced that they intended to reclaim Texas from Mexico. To bring pressure, Polk ordered General Zachary Taylor to lead U.S. forces into the disputed area on the Rio Grande. To Mexican leaders, Taylor's action was an invasion of their country. On April 25, 1846, Mexican troops attacked Taylor's forces. President Polk told Congress that Mexico had, quote, invaded our territory and shed American blood upon the American soil. On May 13th, Congress passed a declaration of war against Mexico. Question number 8. What was the peaceful way that President Polk tried to acquire California and the New Mexico territories from Mexico? Well, he basically said, hey, I've got a deal for you. Here you go. How about you take this deal from John Slidell? We're going to give you $30 million, and that seems like a pretty good deal. And of course, Mexico said no. Question number 9. Why were relations not great between the United States and Mexico at that time? It wasn't great because we were having a dispute over the border as far as where the border should be between Texas' border with Mexico's border. They said it was here, we said it was here, and neither country was really happy about that. And they also said, hey, we want to take Texas back for ourselves. So there was definitely some tension there between these two countries. Question 10. How did President Polk use a sneaky tactic to convince the Congress to declare war against Mexico? Well, if you ever had any brothers or sisters that are younger or older and you try to get them in trouble by poking them, and then when they fight back, you go to your parents and say, look, they're fighting me. That's exactly what we did to the Mexicans. We sent troops into the disputed area, and then when the people of Mexico said, oh, this is an invasion, they attacked us, Polk then looks at Congress and says, see, we're just defending our lands and we got attacked. We have to respond with war. So this was a very sneaky approach by President Polk. A war plan. Polk planned to defeat Mexico by accomplishing 3 goals. First, the United States would drive Mexican forces out of Texas. Second, it would seize New Mexico and California. Finally, American forces would advance into Mexico and capture the capital, Mexico City. By 1847, Zachary Taylor had accomplished the first goal. His army had captured all the important towns in the border area between Mexico and Texas. General Stephen Kearny made progress toward the second goal by marching his troops down the Santa Fe Trail. They captured New Mexico's capital, Santa Fe, in 1846 after the Mexican governor fled. Kearny then turned toward California. Question number 11. What were the 3 goals that President Polk had for winning the war against Mexico? Number 1, we would drive the forces out of Texas. Number 2, we would seize New Mexico and California. And 3, we would advance into Mexico and capture their capital, which is usually how you know if you've won a war, if you can take your opponent's capital. Question 12. By 1847, how was the war going for the United States? It was going splendidly. We had already accomplished 2 of the goals. We had driven the Mexican forces out of Texas, and we had seized New Mexico, and we're on the way to California. California Uprising. Even before war with Mexico officially began, American settlers in Northern California had begun an uprising. They were encouraged by American General John C. Fremont. The settlers had little trouble overcoming the weak official Mexican presence in the territory. On June 14, 1846, the Americans declared California independent. They renamed it the Bear Flag Republic. The name came from the flag the rebels had made for their new nation. The Bear Flag Republic did not exist for long. Within a month, American warships arrived at the ports of San Francisco and San Diego to claim the Republic for the United States. Mexico still refused to surrender, even though it had lost New Mexico, California, and Texas. President Polk sent General Winfield Scott and his troops to attack Mexico City. They landed in the port of Veracruz and captured it after 3 weeks of fighting. They still needed to travel 300 miles to Mexico City, fighting Mexican troops along the way. Finally, in September 1847, 6 months after Scott's forces landed in Veracruz, they captured Mexico's capital. Polk's plan for the war had succeeded. Now we can answer a couple of questions. Let's see here. Question 13. What happened in California on June 14, 1846? California declared itself an independent country and named it the Bear Flag Republic. Question 14. What happened to the Bear Flag Republic within a month of declaring their independence? Well, we came in with warships and said, you're going to be part of us. And so the Bear Flag Republic became California, which became part of American territory. And finally, question number 15. What happened in September of 1847? Polk's plan for the war has succeeded as Scott's forces had taken the capital of Mexico. Peace terms. Defeated on February 2nd, 1848, Mexico's leaders signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in what became known as the Mexican Cession. Mexico gave the United States more than 500,000 square miles of territory, what are now the states of California, Nevada, and Utah, as well as most of Arizona and New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. Mexico accepted the Rio Grande as its border with Texas. In return, the United States paid Mexico $15 million and assumed $3.25 million in debts Mexico owed American citizens. Later, the 1853 Gadsden Purchase by the United States acquired for Mexico the southern portions of what would become Arizona and New Mexico. With this purchase, the borders of the contiguous United States were complete. With Oregon and the former Mexican territories under the American flag, the dream of manifest destiny had been realized. The question of whether the new land should allow slavery, however, would lead the country toward another bloody conflict. Spoiler alert, that's the Civil War they're talking about there. And here we can see the picture of the Mexican Cession. All that land was won in the Mexican-American War. And then here's that final Gadsden Purchase. All right, question number 16. What treaty ended the war between the United States and Mexico? The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Question 17. What was the Mexican Cession? The Mexican Cession was the land that we acquired from winning the war, and you can see that pictured here once again. That is California, Nevada, Utah, and then most of what we call today Arizona and New Mexico, and then parts of Colorado and Wyoming. Question number 18. What were some of the other terms of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo? Well, we also got Mexico to accept that the Rio Grande would be the border with Texas, and we also gave Mexico $15 million and assumed the money that they owed Americans in debt. Question 19. What was the Gadsden Purchase? The Gadsden Purchase was the final part of our manifest destiny. This is where we purchased these parts of what we now know as Arizona and New Mexico. We did that because we were building another transcontinental railroad going in the south, and that's another reason we wanted those portions of land. And question 20. Even though the United States had accomplished manifest destiny and had won the Mexican-American War, what issue would eventually lead America into its bloodiest conflict ever? It would be the issue of slavery, and that would be, of course, the Civil War. And we'll be getting that in a couple of chapters from now. And here we see manifest destiny. We start with the original 13 states, or 13 colonies, as you will. And then you can just see how then we started to gain more and more and more from the British. and then we acquired the Louisiana Purchase, and then we started to get Florida and Oregon, and then the Texas annexation, and then the Mexican cession, and finally the Gadsden Purchase. And the dream of Atlantic Ocean to Pacific Ocean would be fully realized by 1853. This was accomplished with that Gadsden Purchase. Well, thank you so much for watching. Before we go, I don't have a meme, but we are saying goodbye to another president, James K. Polk. He is often called, as it says here, the least known consequential president, as he did accomplish the 4 goals he sought for president. And he is considered the strongest president in between Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln. He's the only Speaker of the House to become President of the United States, and his nickname was Young Hickory because he was a protege of Old Hickory, Andrew Jackson. Historians rank James K. Polk above average. He comes in at 18. He did accomplish a lot as a one-term president, and so he does get this high mark. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.